Welcome back to Two Pretty Good Bad Men, an Alias Smith & Jones podcast. I'm your host, the critically panned Tabitha, and today we're covering episode 9, Stagecoach 7. And already that is just too many numbers, and I am way too hot to be doing math. Now here's some more numbers. This episode was shot mid-February of 1971, and it aired on March 11th, 1971. Most of our behind-the-scenes guys we already know, which is great because there are approximately 600 guest stars this week. The episode was directed by Richard Benedict, who also directed The Great Shell Game. You know, the episode where Hayes and Kid are apart the entire episode. At least this is an improvement on that. The story was by Roy Huggins, and our new credit here is Dick Nelson. He wrote a total of 8 ASJ episodes, and they're all good to great in my book. I really love the ones that he worked on, including this episode. His first writing credit was for The Alaskans, which I haven't seen, but according to Roy Huggins was a Maverick ripoff. He wrote for other westerns like Bonanza, Laramie, Sugarfoot, Tales of Wells Fargo, Rawhide, Wagon Train, The Virginian, and Gunsmoke. Good lord, that about covers all of them, doesn't it? He also wrote for Ben Casey and Dr. Kildare, and 4 episodes of Medical Center. He wrote an episode of Ben Murphy's short-lived series Griff that he starred in with Lorne Greene, and he has a good amount of television movies to his name. He was the creator of a show called Kingston Confidential, starring Raymond Burr, about a publishing magnate who solves crimes in his spare time. Yeah, that only lasted half a season. Nelson was also the executive story editor of T.J. Hooker and wrote 13 episodes for that series. And because I know you're all wondering, yes, he did write an episode of It Takes a Thief. We got one. This episode is a retelling of The Virginian called Strangers at Sundown. Now let's get to our many guest stars. You might want to take notes. First we have Keenan Wynn as Charlie Utley. Keenan Wynn was the son of Ed Wynn, who you would definitely know if you saw him or heard his voice. If for no other reason than he was the Mad Hatter in Disney's Alice in Wonderland, and he was Uncle Albert in Mary Poppins. You know, the guy floating on the ceiling because he was laughing so much? Keenan's grandfather on his mother's side was actor Frank Keenan, and he was mostly a stage actor, but he did make movies in the 1920s until his death in 1929 of pneumonia. Keenan was in the movie See Here, Private Hargrove. Remember that one? Based on the novel by Marion Hargrove, who wrote the episode Return to Devil's Hole. We're just looping back around with ASJ now. Wynn was also in movies like Annie Get Your Gun, Dr. Strangelove, and Song of the Thin Man. He did a 10-episode stint on Dallas. He was in Parts, A Clonus Horror, which is another great episode of Mystery Science Theater. You know, when I started this podcast, I had no idea how many connections there were to be made to Mystery Science Theater, and I am delighted. He was nominated for an Emmy for his guest starring role in Policewoman. He starred in a couple of his own short-lived shows. The first was called Troubleshooters from 1959, which was a half-hour action-adventure show, and the other was called Call to Glory from 1984, about a group of military pilots in the 1960s. This show also starred Craig T. Nelson and Elizabeth Shue. Keenan Wynn would go on to show up on 2 more episodes of ASJ. Next we have Steen Einat as Harry Downs. Sadly, he passed away of a heart attack just about a year after this episode was shot. Even more tragically, his son also died very young, at just 32 years old, after battling diabetes. Einat's widow, actress Sally Carter Einat, said of the deaths, "Steve's gifts for his 70th birthday is that he gets his boy back. Now they will know each other." Though he died young, Einat put in a lot of work. His first credit is back in 1958. He guest starred on many shows like The Outer Limits, Dr. Kildare, Death Valley Days, 77 Sunset Strip, Perry Mason, I Dream of Jeannie. I never watched Jeannie. I was a bewitched girl. My name is Tabitha, after all. And he also did an episode of It Takes a Thief, so we've really got that covered this week. He guest starred on Star Trek, the episode Whom the Gods Destroyed, the one where his character takes over an insane asylum and Kirk and Spock get stuck there. I love Star Trek. He also did 3 episodes of Mannix and 7 of the FBI. Next is L.Q. Jones as Clint Weaver, our head bad guy. And this guy was in The Wild Bunch, The Edge, Casino, and does anyone remember the Mask of Zorro movie? Sure, he's in like 1.5 scenes, but nobody stuff as Jack. Nobody's tough as Jack. That was just for me. He had a very long career and only died last year at age 94. As far as television goes, he did 5 episodes of Renegade, he did that 1 episode of The A-Team with Boy George, 2 episodes of Dukes of Hazzard, and 4 of Charlie's Angels, 10 episodes of a short-lived show called The Yellow Rose, which starred Sam Elliott, Sam Elliott's mustache, Sybil Shepherd, and David Soul. It was a Western. Speaking of, he did 5 episodes of The Big Valley, and I've talked about how much I like that show. And he did 4 episodes of Lassie. Aw, who's a good doggy? According to IMDb, he was meant to be the sidekick on Cheyenne, but got dropped after 3 episodes so that Cheyenne could play the lone hero. Ouch. Come on, guys. Lone hero shows are boring. You need someone consistent to bounce off of, in my opinion. Also, he directed the movie A Boy and His Dog. The one with Don Johnson and his talking dog No, I won't spoil it. Just trust me. Give it a watch. And he too will show up on another ASJ episode. On the second day of shooting this episode, LA experienced a massive earthquake, and LQ Jones had this to say, quote, I couldn't decide whether it was worth going to work for since we were on location in the valley, but finally wandered on to the location at about 7 a.m. By 9 a.m., everybody had showed up, and we got on with the shooting. We're a bunch of wide eyes on the set, but we got her done. End quote. Next is Dana Elker as Benjamin Bowers. He was a regular on MacGyver after Richard Dean Anderson recommended him. He did 3 episodes of The A-Team and 3 of Falcon Crest. He was a regular on the show Black Sheep Squadron with Robert Conrad. He did 12 episodes of Beretta, and he was in The Sting, which has come up on this show before. He did 35 episodes of Dark Shadows and 3 episodes of Car 54, Where Are You? And to my understanding, that was the first ever buddy cop show that is relevant to my interest. He started going blind due to glaucoma in the early 90s, and this was written into his role on MacGyver. He passed away in 2005. He will appear in more ASJ episodes down the line. We're getting through it, I swear. Next is John Kellogg as Joe. He was in movies like 12 O'Clock High, Pride of the Yankees, and Best Picture winner The Greatest Show on Earth, a movie a lot of people don't think should have won that year. He did 6 episodes of Gunsmoke, 5 of Bonanza, and 4 of The Virginian, 45 episodes of Peyton Place, and his last credit on IMDb is an episode of Wise Guy in 1990. Next is actress Mitzi Hoag as Winifred Bowers. Hoag was a trained teacher, but chose to make a go of it as an actor instead. She did 9 episodes of Here Come the Brides with David Soul again. She starred in a short-lived series called We'll Get By, created by Alan Alda? What? It appears to be a family sitcom starring Paul Sorvino? Huh. Her last credit is an episode of Grace Under Fire from 1993. Next is Angela Clark as Hannah Utley. She was in movies like The Harlem Globetrotters, The Great Caruso, and Darling, How Could You? She did 2 episodes of St. Elsewhere, 2 of Beretta, 2 of Bonanza, and 3 of Death Valley Days. She was in Ida Lupino's Outrage, a movie about sexual assault, and Lupino was probably the only female director working in Hollywood at that time, so we respect her on this podcast. And Clark was in the Vincent Price version of House of Wax. Next we have Randolph Mantooth as Dan Loomis. Yep, firefighter/paramedic Johnny Gage himself of Emergency fame. He is still alive, and that makes me glad. And he campaigns and celebrates to this day for paramedics, and I think that's wonderful. Aside from Emergency, I remember him from a segment in Night Gallery with Vincent Price and an episode of Battlestar Galactica. He was also a regular on a soap opera called Loving, which got revamped into The City for many years. He worked on some other soaps too, like 35 episodes of As the World Turns and 11 of One Life to Live. Playing his wife, Ellen Loomis, is Sally Shockley. I wish I had something to say about her, but she has a small IMDb page that has next to no information about her. She started out doing 20 episodes of The Doctors, and I could tell some stories I know about that show, but this is already eating up way too much time. Maybe if it comes up again, I will. She starred on a short-lived series, Sarge, about a cop-turned-priest. That sounds like a joke, but it's real. She also did an episode of Emergency, and she will pop up in another ASJ episode. As for the bad guys, we have Jeffrey Lewis, and I love him. He's part of two core memories for me. One is when I was at my cousin's house, and he was watching Salem's Lot on TV, and the scene where Jeffrey Lewis is rocking in his chair after he's been turned into a vampire scared the crap out of 7-year-old me. Even going to see Flipper at the movies that night didn't help. The second is that he plays one of the bad guys who gets Hutch addicted to heroin in that episode of Starsky and Hutch: The Fix. An episode that I spent hours and hours and hours rewatching as a kid. There's so much David Soul in this episode. He was also in a TV movie I like with Barbara Rush called Moon of the Wolf. He did a bunch of movies with Clint Eastwood, including High Plains Drifter, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, and Every Which Way But Loose. He was in the episode of House, One Day, One Room. Say it ain't so. That's like a terrible episode. And I remember that being the consensus at the time, but now apparently people think it's one of the best. Those people are wrong, just to be clear. He also did 2 episodes of Dawson's Creek. Try to wrap your head around that one. He did an episode of The X-Files, and that seems much more appropriate. He was on a short-lived series in the mid-90s called Land's End about a PI in Mexico. And if you want, that whole series is on Tubi. He was in Tango and Cash, Night of the Comet, and notorious box office bomb Heaven's Gate. But that wasn't his fault. Look, nobody was doing it like him. Also, I am not even joking, I was today years old when I found out that Juliette Lewis is his daughter. And finally, we have Nick Benedict as the other bad guy, Phil. He is director Richard Benedict's son. He worked on 93 episodes of Days of Our Lives. He also guest starred in The Dukes of Hazzard, The Fall Guy, Knots Landing, and Adam 12. He passed away this July from complications of spinal surgery. Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Tune in next week as I'm kidding, we'll finally talk about the episode. I'm sorry. We start with another sneak peek where we see the guys tied up at a stagecoach station. There's some guys outside with guns who want them, and there's some guys inside who don't want to hand them over. Hayes cuts in the argument, saying that he'd rather stay with the guys inside, since at least they'll turn them in alive. Then we get some more gunplay and cue the credits. I'll say that the sneak peek was better than any of the ones we've had so far. Hayes, Kid, and our millions upon millions of guest stars are waiting for the stage to finish loading up. Aw, Hayes is dozing off. He's so cute. An asshat of a man named Harry Downs comes in at the last minute to get a ticket. They're headed towards Mesa. The driver, Joe, announces that they're ready to get going. Since there are 7 passengers plus a baby, they won't all fit in the coach, and the driver says someone will have to ride up top with him. Wait a minute. 7 passengers? Stagecoach number 7? Wow, man, this episode's deep. Aside from Hayes, Kid, and Downs, there are 2 married couples traveling with them. A young couple with a baby named Dan and Ellen Loomis, and an older couple named Benjamin and Winifred Bowers. It seems to me, since there are 3 groups of 2 plus the baby, and Downs is traveling alone, that he should be the one to sit up top. But, again, he's an asshat, and he doesn't want to. He volunteers Dan Loomis, but he and his wife are like, no. I need help with the baby. Dan tells Ellen to butt out because she's just a girl and she might end up menstruating all over him. This doesn't sit well with Kid, naturally, and he points out that since Down was the last to buy a ticket, he should sit up top. Hayes is behind him, grinning because he, as well as the rest of us, know how this is going to end. Downs has the nerve to say that he will allow Dan to stay with his wife and baby, as if it's in any way his decision, and he gets to order these people around. And that the kid should ride up top. The kid stays calm. Downs says that he either rides up top or he doesn't ride at all. What is this guy's problem? Who died and made him king of Stagecoach 7? He says, get up top, just get, or draw. What do you think the kid does? Yeah, draws before Downs can even blinks, and then he shuts his mouth. Again, Hayes is grinning proudly. I love them. Downs ends up riding up top. Serves him ripe. I hope he breathes in nothing but horse farts. The Loomises are sitting next to Mr. Bowers, and Mrs. Bowers is sitting on the opposite side between Hayes and Kid. She says she likes facing backwards, and her husband, who is also an asshat by the way, likes facing the front. When she and Hayes are making polite conversation, her husband basically tells her to shut it. Can he ride up top too? Before they can get much further, they're held up by a gang of bandits. The gang relieves them of anything valuable they have on them. One of the bandits, Clint, looks at Hayes for a long time like he recognizes him. Uh-oh! When they take off, Hayes confirms that they do know the guy and hopefully he didn't recognize them. At the stage, Bowers is chewing out the driver, like it's his fault. Joe says that the company will do their best to get some of his money returned. Is there anything worse than being an employee and getting yelled at by a customer for things that you have no control over? Clint finally places where he knows the boys from, and he knows there's a $20,000 reward on the two of them together. So it's payday! The coach arrives at the station and meets the Utleys, Charlie and Hannah, who run the place. Hannah kindly greets them and ushers everyone inside. Hayes and the kid hang back for a minute, still worried about Clint recognizing them. But they decide, it's probably fine, and they join everyone else. I mean, what can they do? They're in the middle of nowhere and they don't have any horses of their own. While Charlie's changing the horses, he's confronted by Clint and a couple of his men. Clint tells him that he's got Hayes and Curry inside and that he wants him to bring him out. If he does, he'll give him $2,000. 2,000 out of 20? That seems like a low ball. The mood is kind of tense inside for some reason. No one's really talking, and you can just hear the baby making cute little baby noises. I love babies. Then Bowers starts berating his wife for getting her ring stolen. He says that she shouldn't have brought it in the first place. Is the point of this episode that men suck? That and the number 7? Charlie comes in, rifle raised and ready to tie up Hayes and Kid. His wife helps him without much question. Charlie tells everyone who they are, but of course the boys won't admit it. Then he opens the window and shouts to the gang outside that the deal is off and he's going to claim the reward for himself. Okay, we'll just add Charlie to the list of men who suck in this episode. Not because he wants to turn them in, but because he's knowingly risking the lives of all these people to do so. We love Hayes and Kid, but they are guilty of the crimes they committed. They're not the fugitive. But the rest of these people haven't done anything, except for a couple of them are jerks. Clint informs Charlie that there are 7 of them outside. 7s everywhere! Charlie tells him to flip the table over and hide behind it and they'll be fine. What a heartless asshole! There's a baby in there! He's gonna let a baby get shot at because he wants money? Downs has something to say, as usual, and wants to let the gang have Hayes and Kid. In this case, I can understand his point of view. I mean, I wouldn't want to die for 2 wanted outlaws. The shooting starts, and I really love how Hayes and Kid are not even that concerned. Joe at least brings up the fact that Charlie's wrong for risking these people's lives, but Charlie's just like, don't care, want money. And now we're back to the sneak peek. Hayes knows that the gang will turn them in dead, but he believes Charlie will turn them in alive. And if Charlie was doing it for that reason, I'd be on his side, but again, he's not. He is just being greedy. And the poor baby is crying. Charlie, you are a monster. Looking at where everyone is positioned behind the table when the shooting's going on, Downs and Mr. Bowers are protecting themselves. Mrs. Bowers is helping Dan and Ellen shield their baby. Bless her. The boys knock themselves to the floor. When there's a break in the shooting, Kid tries to sit himself up, and Hayes asks why bother, you'll just have to do it again in a minute. Still, he gets Dan to help pull them back up. Then the shooting resumes, and they throw themselves over once again. I love the look on Hayes' face. He's just annoyed by this whole thing, not scared. And Kid looks so sad that he has to hit the floor again. My boys. While this insane amount of gunplay is happening, you can still hear the baby crying, and it's really bringing out the mama bear in me. You all suck for shooting near a baby. Downs gets the drop on Joe, takes his gun, and orders the Utleys to drop theirs. Dan helps Hayes and Kid up again, and Downs says he intends to hand them over to Clint. There are a few shots of Mrs. Bowers tending to Joe, too. She hasn't had many lines, but she's been very compassionate in her actions, and I kind of love her. Downs still negotiates $2,000 for himself. Dude, I get worrying about your life, but now you're being greedy too. And Hayes has a good moment where he's like, come on, you're not upset about what happened between you and my partner, are you? With his arm around the kid. Just as he's about to lead our heroes to the door, Dan jumps down, wrestles the gun away from him. I love Dan too, and not just because he's John Gage. The Utleys get the boys and Downs tied up. Charlie thanks Dan and offers him some of the reward money. But Dan is a good person and he won't hear of it. He says he wouldn't feel right about it, subtly shaming Charlie. Throw that shade, Dan. Throw that shade. And Ellen is smiling at him like she's proud. They're very cute. The shooting starts yet again, and the boys yet again toss themselves over. And the baby starts crying yet again. What is the end game here, Charlie? But this time, a bullet goes through the table and kills Downs. Charlie does not care at all and says some people have no luck. Dude, Downs was an asshole, yes, but his blood is on your hands. He died as a direct result of your greed. This is not about luck. This is about the selfish choice that you made. Bauer stands up and shouts at Charlie to hand them over. Then Charlie says, well, they can't send them out to be killed, which we know is BS. He already said he's doing this because he wants $20,000. He doesn't care if Hayes and Kid die. Hayes points out to Bowers that Hayes and Curry, wherever they are, would have never killed anyone. That's a fact. Bowers shouts that they just got Downs killed. No. Charlie got Downs killed. Let's not get confused on that point. Mrs. Bauer finally speaks up and lets her husband have it. She actually does care about Hayes and Kid's lives. Did I mention that I love her? He actually finally does shut his dumb mouth after that. Hayes and Kid, being better people than Charlie Utley, offer to go outside. They say that clearly Charlie was wrong about the table being safe, and that they won't risk anyone else getting killed or hurt. What if the next round hits the baby? They make him feel better about it by saying that Hayes can probably talk Clint into turning them in alive, and that's a lie, to be clear. This isn't the first time they've done the right thing, but it is the first time they've straight up been willing to die for the right thing. They're effectively sacrificing themselves for everyone else. My boys. But before they can get out the door, Charlie changes his mind and has them come back. He says he knows they're lying about Clint bringing them in alive. He says if they promise not to try and escape, he'll arm them so they can help get rid of the gang out there. They promise. Dan offers to help shoot too. Bowers takes a minute, but eventually he throws his hat in the ring as well. Now there are 7 shooters inside. More 7s! What does it mean? What does it all mean? Hayes wonders why the gang keeps getting the first shot. So he and Kid fire first this time. This is the final shootout, and that poor sweet baby is crying again. And then the gang just kinda gives up and runs away. A TV-friendly ending if ever I saw one. The stage gets ready to roll out, and Charlie decides not to turn the boys in because they're better men than they think they are. And I think that's a good summary of the two of them. It's true. When push comes to shove, they will do the right thing, even if they don't think they will. The Bowers are now sitting side by side, and that's subtle and very sweet. Hopefully their marriage will improve, and he'll treat her with more respect. After they've been traveling for a little ways, Joe pulls over near a ranch and kicks the boys off. He tells him he knows the guy who owns the ranch and that he'd be glad to sell them some horses. They all part on good terms. The boys stroll away towards the ranch, Kid's arm on Hayes' shoulder. The end. I love this episode. It's a lot of fun. There's an absurd amount of gunplay, especially for there being only one fatality, but that's just part of TV magic. The side characters are pretty fun too. I love Mrs. Bowers and Dan Loomis. I like these types of bottle episode stories too. It forces the writing to elevate when you don't have a lot of set pieces. During my first watch through, this was my favorite episode up to this point. The line of the episode actually goes to the bandit, Phil. When Charlie announces that now they have 7 shooters, he says, "What's he got in there? They must be breeding like rabbits." It made me snort. And the episode goes to both the boys. Having them willing to die to protect everyone else was an incredibly noble gesture coming from them. Next time on Alias Smith and Jones, it's another separation episode where Hayes guides an archaeological party through Devil's Hole territory, and the kid exists. Research for this episode comes from the wonderful book Alias Smith and Jones, Two Pretty Good Bad Men by Sandra K. Segala and Joanne M. Bagwell. Thanks for listening.